Okay, there we go. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you could be here today. Um, this week and next week's webinar is a little different than the first webinar or the group call because up to now we've really been talking about um, what is pet loss, different aspects of pet loss, whether it's anticipatory bereavement, um, different populations, different situations, and then, of course, guilt and anger. Now, I think this week and next week really are kind of the nuts and bolts of helping people who have lost a pet. Not that the other stuff isn't important, but as we told you, and we've kind of mentioned before that part of helping people who have lost a pet is really listening to them, paying attention to what they're saying and how they're saying it, and being able to support them and validate what they're saying. But there is, as you've probably heard me mention, this thing that's really important for all of us, which is do no harm. And when we talk about communicating with clients, it really is possible to do harm if you don't have at least some of the basics, because, like we've talked about in the first module, um, people are not comfortable with grief in general. We've never really been taught how to support somebody who's grieving. And especially if you're choosing to do this work, it is important to know some of the things that work as well as some of the things that don't work. So in this module today, we'll be talking about communication. We'll be talking about it in terms of the following areas. Oh, come on. What? Hold on one second. Having a little bit of an issue. There we go. Um, Understanding the tasks of a pet loss specialist, which we went over some of them in module one, but we'll be talking about them in a different context. We'll also be talking about useful theories in supporting clients that are going to help you be able to help your clients. And then some basic communication skills for working with clients. So those are the topics that we'll be discussing. As I said in the email, this week and next week, the webinars are a little bit information dense. So I'll be stopping a few times so you can ask questions. We'll be answering questions at the end of the webinar. We'll talk a little bit about the homework, which is different than what you've been doing. This week and next week, you get a little bit of a break, so there are no interviews that you'll be doing. You'll be doing more of scenario work, which is very important too. So let's go ahead and get started then. When we talk about the roles of a pet loss specialist, you are going to be offering guidance to pet parents in their most vulnerable state, right? Your strong sense of compassion, of commitment to helping your clients are the most important qualities. By walking the grief journey with your clients, you're going to help them to make informed and healthy decisions as they learn to live without their beloved pets. This first section covers, again, how we do that and the roles we take on in offering that support. Probably the biggest thing is providing a safe environment for clients to share. If you remember, one of the characteristics that we talked about that makes pet loss so challenging is that it's a very disenfranchised type of loss. Many people don't understand the depth of the relationship that pet parents share with their pets. And that's what makes losing them that much harder because we have to be really wary of who we can trust, when we can trust them. That's the importance of creating a safe environment so that your clients feel like they can share with others, whether it be in a group or with you in an individual session. You create that safe environment by developing your relationship as it goes along, a trusting relationship. Sometimes it happens in the group, just even giving them group guidelines so they can understand and feel safe, which is really important. The next couple of slides will kind of give you a little bit more information into how you create that safe environment. When we talk about bearing witness to grief, I always say that being a pet loss specialist is kind of like being a safe vessel, like a life vest in a sense, where clients can share whatever they need to without feeling that their sadness, their guilt, their blame is misunderstood. It's doing what we are going to mention several times. It's listening, not just hearing, but really listening to what your client is sharing. It's about making them feel safe and okay, about having the feelings, whatever they are, about sharing the feelings. One of the greatest benefits in allowing them to feel safe about sharing their feelings is that the more they're able to share their story, and they are going to share it with you over and over and over. Sometimes not the whole thing, but different aspects of it. But the more they can do that, the intensity of that loss does begin to get a little bit less scary. That's part of creating that safe environment. The other part is validating your client's loss. I'm not sure if you remember, but I mentioned that part of what, make sure you're on mute, please. I feel like I'm really good at is that I do have that ability to let go of being a pet loss specialist and kind of go back to being Maz's mom when I'm working with a client. That in itself helps to let them know that I get it because I'm not trying to teach them. I'm just looking to be there, to be that safe place where they can share, to listen, to understand. That's part of the validation as well. Because you, as we've said before, are going to hear so many things. You are going to have people say to you many times, am I crazy or what's wrong with me? Our job is to let them know that nothing is wrong with them. They're grieving. It's part of that. It's part of the process. That's what validating is all about. Listening, letting them know their feelings are valid, are understandable. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the webinar. It's about using words and our own experiences when it's applicable to help them validate what's in their minds and hearts, to let them know that they're not alone. What words am I talking about? It's really not rocket science kind of stuff. It's words like, I am so sorry, or of course, or I can understand that. Phrases that let clients feel understood and accepted. Now, I just told you that clients many times will say to you, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what's wrong with me. They are going to tell you things that are very difficult to hear. There is going to be times when you're going to say, think in your head, yeah, you are a little crazy. Or, oh my God, how could you have done something like that? That's where, and we talked a little bit about this in the first module. You've got to really be non-judgmental. And it can be very hard. And it's something you definitely do get better at as you do this work, because you never want to share the thoughts that is like, yeah, it was your fault, you know. Um, as a pet loss specialist, you must be non-judgmental, because if your clients start feeling any kind of judgment from you, they're going to start getting defensive. Your clients are there with you because they feel sad, they feel angry, they feel guilty. They are probably thinking the same things you're thinking and beating themselves up because of it. Again, we talked about this. It's about not only not saying it, but not allowing yourself to show it. So if you're very expressive facially, like I am, and I had to work on that, it can be difficult. Body language, you've got to watch. You have to listen. Remember, talk less, listen more. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's very important that you talk less and listen more. Allow your clients to put everything out there on the table. It comes back to providing that safe space. They have to know that this is that one place where they're not going to be judged. And then, of course, it's being compassionate, right? And that's part of, for all of us, why we're taking this class, because we want to be able to help people because we have that compassion for them. Compassionate communication shows a genuine desire to understand, to get to know the other person. When you communicate with compassion, people know, they could feel it, that you're sincere, that you can be trusted. Like I said, simple phrases, I am so sorry. That had to be horrible. Or he was so beautiful. Again, being genuine here too, right, is very appropriate. We'll talk more about this. Shedding a tear is okay. It's important, of course, to remain professional, but shedding a tear is very real and it can help you build a bond with them. You don't want to do it on purpose, but if it's genuine, it's fine. We talked about this in the first module too, which is staying aware. And there's a few different ways that you need to stay aware. Being aware of any prejudices, if you want to call it that, we may have. If you're uncomfortable talking to men, talking to women, talking to children. Again, we talked about that may not be a population that you want to do. So being aware of that. Being very aware that you may be triggered by what you hear. Your client's grief, your client's experiences may very well bring up memories and emotions of your own grief experiences, and that can be emotional. It can be very, very difficult. And that's why we talk about making sure that you work through your own grief before you start helping others. And if you start feeling like it is bringing things up, that's when you need to find your self-care buddy, and we'll talk about that, or your therapist, right? Everybody who helps somebody should have a therapist. I don't think I've ever met a therapist that I know that doesn't have their own therapist. In some of your modules, again, we have asked you to share your own grief with us. At Module 5, you just did it. It's hard for us, our hearts go out to you and we read those stories. Point is this, unresolved grief always finds its way out. And you don't want it to come out when you're supporting your clients. You also are going to have to be aware of how your clients are reacting to you. If you're having a hard time getting through to them, if they're reacting negatively, you may have to reassess whether you are the best person to help that person. And that's where we get into this next area, which is being flexible. Many people in the same houses, people who shared a pet, are not going to grieve in the exact same way. What works for one may not work for another. We're going to give you some skills to help you, but they're not written in stone. You may have to find something else. That's why this is your first step. You should never stop learning. I mean, Connie and Sharon and other people who work in the chats with us. We're always sharing resources, webinars, courses, articles, books that help us help our clients best. So it is part about continuing to learn so you have the most tools possible. You're also going to be dealing with people whose loss is very new. They go through, we often call the first month or two, the grief fog. So you may tell them something to try in the first week, and they come back the next week and they're still struggling, and you say, how did, I don't know, writing a letter? How did writing a, oh, I forgot you said that, or no, I didn't try that yet. You may tell them you may want to join one of the chats or one of the groups. And you see them a couple weeks later and you know they didn't do one of those things. And you mention it to them, and again, it's new to them, and they're like, yeah, I wasn't sure about that. And it can be frustrating because you're like, if you go to the group, it'll help you. Or if you read this book, or if you write that letter. It's not that they don't want to. Part of it is that they're in this grief fog. They haven't had to deal with these emotions, which are very, very strong. But you also have to temper your expectations, right? You really have to work without expectations. You have to be vulnerable to be able to say, this is not working. What do I have to do? And not think by saying that there's something wrong with your client or that you're not good enough and that there's not, something's wrong with you. That's where the flexibility comes in, the learning comes in. It may be, there are many times I've reached out to Connie or to my old associate Ellie and said, I don't know. I'm trying to help this person. Do you have any ideas? Do you have any, that is going to help you learn, and it's going to help you be a better pet loss specialist. Another thing, again, you may want to go to those articles, go to those books. And that kind of leads to this next topic we're going to talk about, which is providing pet loss resources. You don't always have to have all the answers. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. When Connie and I and Sharon and Ann first started doing this work, we're talking again 15, 16, 17 years ago. There was not a lot out there. There was some about grief, but as we talked about, the way we help people, the way things are written about grief is so different than when we first started doing this work. Today, there are more resources out there. There's a lot more resources on grief, on pet loss. There's good books, there's good articles, and it's really okay and important to share that information with our clients too. with my individual clients, even with my group clients, every single one of them gets a copy of, we have a coping strategies handout that Pet Loft Partners created. Every one of them gets that. Every one of them gets a pet loss bibliography. Every one of them gets there's a really good article on guilt. We have rack cards that we have come up with on different topics. Again, if they're going through anticipatory bereavement, we'll give them the quality of life scale. We'll give them the pledge from the heart. Point is, like I said, there are things that you can use so that you don't have to have the answer. There are good books. So it's important to keep it in mind. Okay. And I kind of saw that there's a couple of comments in the chat, and actually, this is a really good time to stop the share for a second and see if there are any questions, any comments. Are there any things we mentioned in terms of creating that the safe environment, or listening non-judgmentally, or being flexible, that you're concerned about, that you want more information about, that you don't agree with, that you do agree with? And again, you can put something in the chat box, but please feel free to speak out. Where this is your time where we can connect.
Sandy, there's a question in the chat box from Laura. How would you say that you can tell if the client is getting defensive?
Um, and part of that, Laura, is from experience, and Connie, I'll let you add on to this. But it's the kind of thing like sitting with your hands, arms folded, or your legs crossed, or sometimes they'll shake their head, and then you get clients who will be flat out rude to you. Again, somebody told me something when I first started doing the work, and I don't remember who it was, but I always think about it when I have a really tough client, is just because they've lost a pet and they've loved a pet doesn't mean they're a nice person. And it's true, right? And maybe that's why they spend more time around their pets, because they don't, they
They don't
don't,
have any friends.
you know, you know,
Why, why I have 5 dogs.
yeah,
Well, and I think, you can pretty easily tell when someone's getting defensive, if they start to argue with you or um, like Sandy said, close up physically and they might close up verbally as well. And so and it's common, people always don't like to hear what they're being told.
right. And it's like we talked about too. What do people do when they're grieving? It's a lot easier to be angry than it is to be sad.
Yeah.
And you are, and we talk a lot about this in module 10, I think. It's like shoot the messenger, right? Like you become that punching bag. The thing is, and I say this all the time, it's not personal. And when you can remember that it's not personal, why take it as it is? Again, a lot easier said than done, right? But it's something to think about.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's another one from Kayleen. Uh, Working in veterinary medicine, we're taught not to cry harder than the client. Does this hold true for pet loss specialists? Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Go ahead, Connie, go ahead.
No, I just, yeah,
Oh,
that's,
no,
yeah.
yeah,
And that's why, and for my support group, I ask facilitators to attend a group or two just to make sure they don't have any unresolved grief issues, because we never want somebody to, you don't want to just burst into tears and like, I can't do it, and then run out of the room. And so, yeah, it's we don't want to cry more than the client. Same with veterinarians.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, and I don't know about how you feel, Connie, but I do feel sometimes when clients see you shed a tear, it's like it does help to build the connection. Like I said, don't do it like in order to build that connection. Don't do the crocodile tears kind of thing. Um, but or hide an onion in your drawer or something like that. But if you feel it, it's okay. But yeah, you've got to stay professional about it. Anything else?
Nothing in chat.
Okay.
Can raise your hand or just
Yeah. These little icons speak out.
speak out or forever hold your peas.
Yeah. I don't see anything, Connie, do you?
No.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and go into what I call the information dense area, and it's like it's important, but there is a lot of information, and we'll stop after the section and answer any questions. Then too, like you did, you can put things in the chat as to, so that we can go back to it as well. Okay, there we go. Oh, okay, come on, computer. Come on, computer. There you go. So like I said, this is our webinar alert that this section is a little bit more information dense. A lot of, whoops, that was weird. A lot of information we're going to be sharing with you. It's all very useful. It's all very pertinent. If you remember in the first webinar that we did, we went through different theories of understanding grief. Well, but there's also different theories, if you want to call them, or frameworks to help you understand how to support your clients. And we really believe that it's important to have a basic understanding of these so you can be flexible, like we talked. You want to have the greatest amount of tools in your grief toolbox. And again, what we're doing here, like in the other modules, this is an overview. If I was really going to talk about these theories, we'd be here for the next 2 weeks. There's very good books on them if you want to learn more about it. There's even like a little webinars or courses. Most likely you are going to be drawn to one that works for you best. But in different situations, you may have to use something else. So what are we going to be talking about here? We're going to be talking about companioning, cognitive behavior therapy, EMDR, and then how to integrate it and kind of finding your way. Because having a well-rounded background is going to help you help each client. You may find that you are not the best fit for that client, and you do need to know when to refer. For example, there's EMDR, right, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a type of psychotherapy that enables people to heal from what we talked about in module, I think it was 4, the traumatic accident, distressing life experiences. We're going to talk about that a little bit more um, because you may have a client who is experiencing PTSD-like symptoms because they've witnessed the horrible death of a pet. I'm not trained in EMDR, but I do recommend it. I have a couple of people who do EMDR therapy. So I need to at least be able to explain it to my client, to explain why I think it might help them. We're gonna offer information on this and the other two, the companioning and cognitive behavior uh, therapy, which you will use the most, those two, in helping people. And again, part of it you may not use on a day-to-day or even a weekly basis, but you've got to at least have some basic knowledge because you may have a client who needs cognitive behavior therapy, and we are not therapists. We don't have that information to be able to really delve in and offer that. But let's start talking about companioning. This is the method that I align best with. I know Connie and some of the other people in our organization. I think it's very helpful for pet loss. It really is about being non-judgmental, about listening, and also about learning. When I explain companioning to people, I say that I'm not dragging my client down that grief road. Instead, I'm really walking alongside them. I'm listening, I'm caring. Companioning is about being totally present for the mourner. You actually learn from your client, you observe your client. They are going to give you the answer so that you can help them. They may not realize it, but because you are paying so much attention to what they're saying and how they're acting, in companioning, you provide a safe space so that clients can embrace their feelings and you can be truly present to the client and obviously to their loss and to their pain. Companioning is not the same as counseling. It's a little bit different. You see on this slide, and the next one explains more about it. It's about learning, not teaching, walking beside your client, listening with your heart. You are not analyzing, you are just listening and feeling and being there with them. With companioning, there is no reward for speed. That is something that Dr. Wolfelt says all the time. You sit, you listen. There are times of sacred silence, which is not very easy, but so very important. Sometimes there's no need for words. Sometimes people just need a place where they can be sad, where they could cry without any judgment. With companioning, that's what you do offer. You want to help people heal from their loss. You do give them tools and strategies, but you also realize that this is their journey and not yours. And so you don't judge it. We kind of said, remember, it's not about us, it's about the client. I'll go back and say that when Connie and I and Sharon and Ann first got in this field, we were taught in a very different method. And again, like I said, grief pet loss support has changed so much over the past 15, 20 years that we've been doing this, right? But we were kind of taught that you let people talk for a while, you give them strategies, and then bing, bang, boom. If they're not done, well, then something's really wrong. You know, companioning is completely different. Companioning is allowing that person to be who they need to be for as long as they need to be that. Now, again, they're obviously 3 years down the road if they're still in the same place. That's an issue, and we'll talk more about that too. But it is what I think you will find most useful in helping people with who have lost a pet. I think it's something that the more you learn about it, you'll find really helpful. With companioning, you do not take away the pain. You do not fix them. You're not responsible to end their pain. You're present to their pain. You bear witness. We talked about that. You allow them to be in pain. Again, not easy. Dr. Wolfelt, and I always like it when he talks about this, says that companioning acknowledges that grief forever changes or transforms the mourner's worldview. And think about that. Think about that if you've gone through a very significant pet loss or a human loss. I know, and I say this all the time. The person I was on July 1st, 1999, which is the day before my dad died, is a very different person than the person I became and involved into in starting on July 2nd, 1999. It really does change you. And I will let you know, I still miss Moss and Callie and all the other pets and people I've lost. I always will. There are times when the pain of the loss is stronger, when the guilt is worse than other times. I've learned to accept that though. It's part of grief. By acknowledging those feelings, I'm able to let them come in, feel them, and let them go. By accepting that it's part of grief, I am able to have a good life. I have Jeter and Faith here. I'm able to love again. Something Dr. Wolfelt also says, and you can probably hear I'm a big fan of his. I have read his books, I've taken one of his courses. Most of the work he does is not pet loss related. Most of the work he does is human loss related. But he also talks about that we will forever grieve, but we won't forever mourn. So think about that a little bit too. I do recommend his books and courses. His primary book, which is the overview of his theory, is called Companioning the Bereaved. It's excellent. You can find more information at centerforloss.com. There's again a lot of books that he has helping children, helping teenagers, help different aspects, traumatic loss. But the only book that he has on pet loss is a book that I recommend to every client that comes to me. It's a really good book. I would recommend that you all read it, is When Your Pet Dies. So again, he doesn't spend a lot of time or energy on pet loss, but this is where, as we talked about, you can learn a lot from just reading things on grief. And I would definitely recommend that you look at his work. So that's like the more touchy-feely woo-woo kind of work, right? But and I do very much align with it. I will also tell you that when I first lost Moz, I was in a huge deep grief fog. There is a lot of people where that grief fog is really, really thick. There are also some people who are more cognitive in their grief. They are the thinkers and they need to know a little bit more about the hows and the whys. And so for them, more is needed. I will tell you that I have a client now who comes to my group, and also I see her privately, and she has Asperger's syndrome. So her affect is different than most of the clients you're going to see, right? And most of the clients I've seen, and I have probably had maybe 3 or 4 people that I've helped, not a lot, um, that either have autism or Asperger's. And it is a little bit more of a challenge. This young lady actually who came to me under the guidance, I guess, of her mom, although she's a woman in her late 30s, because she was struggling with the loss. She's not really a woo-woo type of person. She's more interested, and not to say she hasn't cried about her loss or talked about the pain of it, but she wants to know, and she has said to me a few times, how do I make this stop? And while I can say to her, you can't just make it stop. If I'm really gonna help her, and maybe this is part of the companioning part of it, I have to accept her for who she is and where she's at. And so for her, some of the CBT late stuff has really helped, and we'll talk more about that. For me, when I lost Mars, I struggled to get out of bed. I mean, I didn't go to work for 2 weeks. So the theory of CBT would have helped me and would have been a good model as well for me had it been introduced to me. Before we go into it, though, before we talk about how it can be used to help those who are grieving, I just want to talk a little bit about the background of it. It was actually developed by Albert Ellis in the 50s. Aaron Beck added more to it in the 60s. It's based upon the idea that what we think affects how we feel, which is our emotions, and also how we act, which is our behaviors. And they all interact together. So, specifically, our thoughts can determine our feelings, and our feelings can determine our behaviors. So, when you look at it like that, if we change our thoughts, we can change our emotions, we can change our behaviors. So, how does all of this then apply to grief? For thinkers, for again, somebody like the client I'm dealing with now, who either doesn't want to, is not able to, or just doesn't work for them, kind of the more woo-woo stuff, it provides a framework. It's somewhat of a structure that you can hold on to for support. It offers strategies for healing because thoughts affect feelings, which affect our actions. You could have, let's say, somebody like me who can think when I first lost Maz and did think when I first lost Maz, this is it. I've lost my dad, I've lost my mom, now I've lost Maz. It's just not going to get better. What does that do for me? That's part of why I couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. I was horribly sad and depressed. And what happens then? I'm not able to function, right? I wasn't able to go to work. I always call it the grief diet. I lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks or a week and a half. I wasn't really showering. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was remembering to take care of Callie, who I had, but that's about it. And there is lots of proof out there now that grief can affect us physically. It affects our immune system. But what happens when you find some help? So for me, when I found the group, well, what happened was I started to say, there's other people in this group and they're healing. So maybe I can too, right? Because I was hearing their stories. I was feeling their sadness, but I was also seeing after a while a difference. So what does that do for me? Well, gives me a little bit of hope. That's the emotion. And what does that do for me? Maybe I'll start to take better care of myself. I started to go back to work because actually I looked forward to once a week going to the group and being around people who got it. That's how it can help to help people heal from grief. Another really useful component of CBT is cognitive reframing. And we kind of talked about that a little bit in module 5 with the STOP method. That's very similar. Cognitive reframing is used in a lot of different areas, but basically it's looking at a difficult image from a different angle. We've talked about this, like I said, in dealing with anger, in dealing with guilt, and dealing with traumatic accidents. It's about rather than thinking that everything I did, I was a horrible parent, and all the reasons that I caused Moz to get sick and get cancer. And I started changing that to making a list of all the things I did right. I will tell you that for me, I was really stuck because that night that Moss passed away, he started having seizures and we had to drive to the vet. Thank God my neighbor was available with him having seizures on my lap. And then we got there and we had to run upstairs and give him to the triage staff and they just took him from me and I was left there. It helped me to work out all of those things because I stopped ruminating on that image and started thinking about all his favorite things and all the good things that we did together, all the loving things we did together. That did not happen overnight. Reframing takes work, it takes practice. But over time, those disturbing images did lose their power over me. It's somewhat like retraining our brain, kind of like what EMDR does, but in less of an intense method. Something else to remember about CBT is that we're just talking again. This is an overview. Reframing is not, reframing is, so we call reframing CBT light because it's just a piece of it. So you can work with your clients in terms of reframing, but you are not a trained CBT specialist. I mean, therapists go and take certification courses. And again, it's much more than what we're talking about here. So it's important to remember that too. And I'm going to do what I sometimes do, which I'll say quiz alert or module task alert. Remember, you are not doing CBT. You can do reframing separate, two separate things. Just something to remember as you start to do your assignments this week. So let's talk about EMDR therapy, PTSD and EMDR. We talked about pet loss related to tragic accidents. At that point, you may be dealing with something more. I did this for a little bit. I will tell you, I didn't like it, and so I'm not doing it as much. I was asked to work with people, was asked to work with the Red Cross in helping people who had lost their pets due to fires, floods. And again, this is about, right, staying self-aware and making decisions. For me, that was really, really intense. It was always traumatic loss. And so while I obviously you're going to run across those types of situations. And when my contact with the Red Cross contacts me for something, I will take on some, but I could never. And I have one or two colleagues, and they work closer than with the Red Cross than I do, so they are actually working with them on a weekly basis. It's not something I was able to do. Um, Traumatic loss often can lead to PTSD if it's not dealt with. And there may be some people who are more prone to developing PTSD symptoms. And again, I think you all know what PTSD is, but we often hear about it with our veterans where they are thrown into difficult situations. They see very difficult things, and those images can stay with you. They can intrude into every part of your life. They can be so you can't release them by yourself or without help. Some of the symptoms of PTSD are sleep disorders, nightmares, but it can also be difficulty socializing, working, functioning. So the point is when a pet parent witnesses a traumatic passing or an accident, like a fire, like a pet being hit by a car or, right in front of them or attacked right in front of them, that can lead to PTSD or PTSD symptoms. And again, even if that's the case, I will tell you, I have had clients who have had traumatic losses that I was able to use reframing, the stop method with. But again, I'm going to say this, do no harm. If you have somebody who you feel, and the more you do this, the more you'll know, needs more than what you can offer, then it's your responsibility to be able to say, I don't know how, if I can handle this, I can get you to somebody who can. There's somebody who specializes in this type of work, and really kind of being able to pass them along and let them get the help that they need and the help that they deserve. They're really good specialists. And again, these are therapists who go through certification. They are licensed therapists who, as part of their practice, or one of the women I do that I know is doing almost exclusively EMDR now because she really likes it. It is very effective. As a reminder, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. It's way too complicated to go into in great details here. There are, excuse me, a lot of good articles we can refer you to. There's a couple of good books. Basically, though, EMDR uses a technique called bilateral stimulation. The therapist will guide the client through a series of eye motions, and it's almost like trying to move that difficult memory to a more functioning part of the brain. I have seen it work so many times. I will share, I had a client who was a young man, I'm going to say, could not have been older than 25 or 26. Again, his mom actually called me and they came to the first group together. It was his dog, but it was kind of like he lived close to his family, and everybody was somewhat affected by the loss, and particularly the mom and of course the son. Unfortunately, this was back in I don't know, 2011, 12, and they didn't have those dog harnesses, or they kind of, you saw more of people leaving the windows wide open so the dogs could stick their head out the window. And unfortunately, the young man was on the freeway and his dog did jump out the window, and he was able to stop and get the dog, but the dog didn't make it once it got to the hospital. He was traumatized. It was his first dog they had ever had as a family. And he couldn't even remember in the first group, the mother talk, all he did was cry. That was when I knew he probably needed help, more help than the group could give him. So at that time, I was living in LA. I had two or three therapists who did a lot of EMDR work. Now, I did refer him. He started seeing the therapist. He continued to come to the group, though. And so for the whole time he was with us, he went for EMDR therapy and he came to the group because he did feel he was getting things from the group. That's fine. We are going to talk about connections and referrals. You've heard me say, oh, I have this person who does this, I have that person who does that. Part of it is the fact, like I said, I've been doing this work for almost 16 years now. But you can find those people. You can go on to the Psychology Today website. There's a section, I think you can put in not only your location, but you'll put in specifically either disorder or type of therapy. And if you put in EMDR therapy, you can find people in your area. Again, we're going to talk in the bonus module more about this, but it's important just not to, because you'll probably get a good, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 referrals for EMDR. I mean, not a lot of people do it, but you want to kind of vet that person, right? You want to make sure that you have a good connection, that you got a good feeling with them. So you may want to call them and talk to them about what you're doing and why you want to connect. I will tell you that I have, in particular, I could think about two therapists who refer people back to me too, because neither one of them has ever had a pet. And so they struggle a little bit more when somebody starts talking about pet loss. So you can also, again, make some good connections with people that way. So now that we've completely filled your mind, and it's kind of like I said, a lot of information, let's talk about how you integrate this. Grief is never linear or cut and dry. Every client is going to be at least a little bit different. Every client's experience is going to be a little different. So using an integrative or multidimensional approach, if you want to look at it that way, allows you to have the widest variety of tools to help your clients. It's not a cookie cutter job. It may be the same pet with two different people or an entire family, and everybody's going to be grieving a little bit differently. For one of them, maybe companioning works best. For the other, reframing, CBT type stuff may work best. You need to find out what works best for each person. Oh, geez, I apologize. Thought I shut it off. Um, You need to find out what you're comfortable with too. Most importantly, don't use a methodology that you don't understand, because I go back to do not do no harm, right? Study, learn, read, do what's best for you and do what's best for your client. So I'm gonna open it up again. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you too much, but whoops.
There's
There.
just a couple comments in chat from Laura. I find that tapping therapy can be helpful. Yeah, there's quite a few people who find that.
Yeah, tapping in a sense is somewhat like EMDR in that um it helps to work through some of the traumatic. And so I'm going to share a personal experience. So we have had, and I can't remember her name, and I wouldn't say her name obviously here, even if I even if I could remember her name. We have had a couple of people, couple of our students who were trained in tapping. And there was a discussion, well, can tapping be your main methodology? I don't believe it can, similar to, I don't think that, geez, what is going on? I thought I shut it off. Sorry. And that's just Faith. It's my alarm for to give Faith our medicine, but I give it to her earlier, so we're good. Um, I think you've got to, unless it's like a severe case that would need like an EMDR kind of thing, I think you've got to deal with the emotions of it, more than, in other words, like the talk therapy part. It can help, but it can't be the main thing. I don't know, Connie, what's your thought on it?
Um, yeah, I agree. I think if it works, maybe try that first. Um, and yeah, the two therapies do have a lot in common, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people it hasn't worked on. I've just heard it, from people who has, which
Yeah.
generally happens. Yeah.
And was there something else you said in there?
No, somebody's experience has been with horses using tap therapy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and you know what? I always find that if it works on an animal, then there's no placebo effect there because the animals don't know.
Yeah. Did I
um,
hear somebody?
yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just gonna say, I have found that tapping the times that I have done it, um, the person that was helping me personalized it. So it was something that we needed to talk about first so that she could
Yeah.
personalize it to me. And um so I don't think you could do tapping without having already spoken to someone and knowing what they're struggling with. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
there's lots of self tutorials on it on the internet, so I know
yeah,
that.
and I think again, like you want to be sure. Like I guess for me, if I was going to try it, I would kind of almost like if I was gonna go use EMDR, I would want to kind of look and make sure that that person was trained or certified or had some good experience in it, or I personally probably would not want to just take like a one and done webinar and then be offering it to all my clients. But
I guess you can be certified. I just looked up. I guess you can be
yeah,
certified.
you can be, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of it on how to do it to yourself.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um, is there any questions on any, like I said, I know we gave a lot of information. Any questions on companioning? How comfortable do you think y'all would be with that? Is that something you already do? Any questions on um CBT, reframing? Or have we just kind of made your minds mush and you
I
need to
think
think about it for a bit?
like you said, is information dense.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Um, okay. So we're at the last part of this now. So and I say we're at the last part of it, but it's super important, and I'm going to try to, and Connie, you could add into this too, um, give you some hints because it's part of what you'll be doing for your module task. So let's get into that. If I could find it. There we go. Okay. There we go. Whoops. Come on. Why does this do this every time? There we go. So, as we said before, part of this, the webinar today, is going to talk about some basic communication skills. You've got to have those basic communication skills in order to be a good pet loss specialist. Yeah, part of your job is listening and offering validation and support, but you really have, there are some skills that really are essential as well. The importance of good communication skills, obviously, it can't be underestimated. Good communication is going to help you build that relationship. It's going to assist you in helping clients take that walk through their grief journey and begin to heal it. It's really, really important. So you may have heard, a lot of people I think have heard about this idea of active listening. And although we tell you to listen more, talk less, obviously you have to talk. What you say, how you say it, cannot be undone. You know, it's almost like a tube of toothpaste, right? Once it's out, you can't put those words back. So it's essential that you think before you speak. Um, I'm a huge proponent of therapy. As I said, I've been in therapy. I suggest anybody who uh, helps people, pet loss specialist or anything, um, go to therapy. Uh, I had an experience with a client that, whoops, sorry, had to have their dog, well, they had their dog taken right in front of them by a coyote. When they shared that story with their therapist, and this was a support dog. So she brought the dog wherever she went, including to go see therapy. So the therapist actually knew the dog as well as the client. When she came in and she told the therapist what happened, um, the therapist listened and then said, I think you need to focus on more positive thoughts. And it's kind of like a perfect example of that true but not helpful. Dr. Wolfelt uses it a lot. That's why, too, what you say is so important. You can't take your words back. You want to be able to give credibility to the client and let them know that their grief that they're feeling, that they're experiencing is normal. As we said, a lot of clients will wonder about that because they're surrounded by people who will say insensitive things. That's where these techniques, and I don't know why my computer won't let me go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I don't know if it's my internet or the computer, but either one. That's where different techniques like active listening is so important. And again, like I said, you may have heard of active listening before. Active listening is really listening with all your senses. Listening not only to the words, but to the feelings behind the words. And I think it's important we can use active listening not only with therapy or pet loss support, but with every aspect of our life. There are, and you see in this slide, about 10 different techniques that encompass, there's actually more. If you look at different models, some have 10, some have 12, but most of them kind of look something like this. We're going to talk about a few that you're going to use most often in helping people who have lost a pet. When you do the module task, I'll give you a little hint here. Focus on the techniques that we're talking about. Like I said, there's 10 of them here, right? You don't want to decide to pick one that we didn't talk about and use about it. You want to focus on what we're talking about because it is what you're gonna use the most. There's verbal and nonverbal techniques, and we'll talk a little bit about both of them here. Come on, computer. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about a couple of verbal active listening techniques. You may have heard it as paraphrasing. Some people use the word clarifying, but basically it's showing that you're paying attention by asking questions to confirm the intent of the statement. Examples of this could be like, so what I hear you saying is, or am I correct in thinking that? And then you kind of reiterate the statement back to the client, but in your own words. So I'm trying to think of a little example here. So you could say something like, so what I hear you saying is why it's so difficult to be around other people is that you feel like they're not listening. They're just trying to offer advice, something like that. Of course, that person has said it in their words. They may have told you a whole long story about how their family isn't getting it. You kind of can capsulize it and put it in your own words by saying, so what I hear you saying is, or am I correct in hearing that? Something like that. Something else that, and again, this is more module task or I should say, minimal encouragers. Minimal encouragers are subtle, short verbal exchanges where it encourages your client to share more. Something like, so a client may say something like, it always makes me sad when somebody tells me that. You might say, can you share more about that? Can you give me an example of that? For instance, again, so just 2 or 3 words that's really going to get them to want to talk about it a little bit more. A minimal encourager is not module task alert, module task alert. It's not something like, so I think what I hear you saying is, well, that's more paraphrasing. So a minimal encourager, an example would not be like, I'm trying to think of, because this happens all the time in my
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one too.
too bad.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, and just real quick, and a minimal encourager can be as simple as just going, mm-hmm, or nodding your head. It really is encouraging them to talk more.
But Connie, can you think of and
I'm trying. I can't think of one, but I know it. I know we've had. I don't know. This concept seems to be hard to grasp.
yeah,
Um, but we have I think what happens, Sandy, is people write that it is a minimal encourager, but in actuality, it's either paraphrasing or a normalizing statement or something like that. You want to think of it a minimal of encourager as not even being a sentence long. It's a half,
Right.
it's minimal.
Yeah. And again, the reason this may sound a little confusing to you right now, but in your module task, and you may have looked at it, you may not have looked at it, we are going to give you, you're going to work on two different scenarios. And with those scenarios, we're going to ask you, I think one question is, what support theory do you think you should use? What specific techniques? So in other words, paraphrasing, minimal encouragers. Um, and then we're going to ask you to give two examples of each. I think those are the questions that we use. And so you want to make sure that your specific technique is right, that you're stating it right, and that your examples are right. And what we find, oh, this is it, Connie, and correct me if I'm wrong here. I think what happens is like people ask questions that are more like information gathering. So,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So they may say something like, and use it like as a minimal encourager. They may say, can you tell me more about some of the things that Fluffy liked to do when you played? That's not a minimal encourager. That's a question that you may or may not want to ask somebody who has lost a pet. Um, but again, minimal encouragers, like Connie said, they're not even full sentences. They're like Connie said, you could say, huh, or can you tell me more? Or what's an example of that? Or I see, something that encourages the client to share a little bit more. Let me give you another hint, and I say this for your benefit and for ours because we have to read them. Um, Active listening is not a technique. It is an umbrella of techniques of things like paraphrasing and minimal encouragers and others. So that's important to keep in mind. If we ask you for a technique, please don't put active listening because then we have to mark you off for it. So hint, 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 hint. Okay. So there's also nonverbal, and there was some part of when we were talking, oh, when somebody was saying, how do you know if a client's being defensive on you? And again, you see it, right? That crossing of the hands, that crossing of the legs, not looking at you directly. Because nonverbal communication obviously doesn't use words. It is that attending, that observant body language, that open body posture, that encouraging gestures, direct eye contact, non-judgmental facial expressions, the affirmative head nods. Those are all things that we want to focus on. So when you work with somebody, you do want to be sure to have that open body posture. Encouraging gestures. Again, make sure to look at them directly. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be a little weird if you stare right at them for 45 minutes or an hour, but to look at them, to nod your head when it's appropriate. Dr. Wolfelt always talks about the bobblehead doll effect, right? Where, you go to the baseball games or the football games, you get those little statues where you can hit the head and it goes up and down real quick. You don't want to nod your head for every single thing they're saying. You want to nod your head when it's effective and it means something. And then, of course, the non-judgmental facial expressions. Um, Something really important, and I think it's become even more important after COVID. You want to be careful about touch, right? A gentle touch on the arm or something during a tense or anxious time could sometimes mean more than words can. But you don't want to be, and this was hard for me because I am a hugger. I want to, if it was up to me, I would have everybody in my group form a line and I'd give them a hug as they walked out the door. Not everybody likes to be hugged. Not everybody likes to be touched. So if you want to give somebody a hug, ask. Just say, would you mind? I'd like to give you a hug. Are you comfortable with that? And if they say no, say, not a problem. I get it. Not everybody is comfortable. Just know I'm here to support you. Another thing with touch that you don't want to do is that, um, I don't want to call it demoralizing, but that like tap on the shoulder, like there, it'll be okay. Nobody likes that, right? Because it almost is like, all right, let me dismiss you. It's a very dismissive gesture. So you want to be careful about touch. There are a couple of other verbal techniques, and this is what I'm saying. Some models consider normalizing or self-disclosure part of active listening. Some models don't include it. Okay, so we separate it out here, but it's two techniques that you are going to use a lot in helping people, talking to people during the loss. And normalizing it really gives credibility um, to your client's thoughts or feelings or behaviors. It lets them know that they're not alone in feeling that or thinking that. So an example is, of course, it's understandable that you feel this loss is harder. The relationship you had with Fluffy is very special. Normalizing may be, as you're going to see when you come to the group, so many people who have lost a pet feel very similar. So you're not like dismissing it. You're letting them know that a lot of people in similar circumstances feel similar. You're normalizing those emotions. The other thing is self-disclosure, and you've heard us talk about this. You want to, if it's appropriate, it's okay to share a personal experience, but it's important to keep in mind, is it appropriate? And I think in the group call, somebody made the point. It's like, oh my God, I just want to tell them about my story and how I healed from it because it's so similar. That's what you don't want to do. If there's a little part of it that's similar, it's fine, but you don't want to spend again. If you have a private session that's 45 minutes an hour, you don't want to spend 25 minutes of that 45 minutes talking about how you healed from Fluffy's loss. But here's a couple examples of something you may want to use for self-disclosure. Joan, I can so relate to your pain. I remember how hard it was to get that cancer diagnosis with Scott. Something similar, something very brief, something quick, but lets them know that you can relate to it. So, here is our final thought. And look, as you become more prepared to help your clients, it's really important to remember that you are not going to take away their pain. You can't. You can give them techniques and tools that'll make it a little easier to bear. You can walk with them, as Dr. Wolfelt talks about, on their grief journey with an open heart open ears, compassionate soul. You can help them face their grief and allow them to come to that new normal. Connie, I don't know, do you get the emails from What's Your Grief?
Yeah.
Did you see, and I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, that last one talked about like being okay?
Um, I was just thinking about sharing that with the group as we talked about how grief theories have evolved over time because I really like where grief theory is going now,
Yeah,
into
no, go ahead. Take this time now. Go ahead.
yeah, but in going into more um, not pathologizing grief and the idea of continuing bonds. Um, and that grief is never over, you
Right.
know. And so yeah, I really like where the thought about grieving is heading.
Yeah, it's almost like Dr. Wolfelt says, and I'm not like he's not, I don't have an altar of him kind of thing, but I do like his work.
I
Um,
do because he has huskies.
oh, that's right. He does have
Yeah, he
keys.
has huskies.
Yes, he does. That is right. Okay, so Connie has an altar of him.
I have a crush on him, yeah, I
Yeah.
guess.
So he always talks about like that we will forever grieve, but we don't have to forever mourn.
Or
You know,
suffer. Yeah.
yeah, but absolutely in that idea of continuing bonds. I mean, again, like I said, I still have, and I know it makes people feel really uncomfortable. Ask me if I care, you know. Um, I still have Maz and Callie's cremains on a shelf in my living room with their pictures because I want it there. I have
Right.
my mom and dad there too, though. So, like that is my way of continuing a bond. Pat Lost Partners is my way of continuing that bond. It's there's a really good book and I'm tired, so I can't remember the name of it. Um, Connie, you probably know it better. It's okay. What's
Oh, okay that you're not okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it has to do with human loss. But again, we always talk about how we can use other resources, and that's a really good one. It's okay that you're not okay. Um, it's something I know, Connie, you've referred it to your clients, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna put the link in the chat because I think it's excellent and like Sandy said, it is written more towards
Yeah.
human grief, but I like it that she just doesn't pull any punches. She is to the point and she actually comes out and says, "This sucks."
Yeah.
And and I like her idea that um some things cannot be fixed because we
Yeah.
talked about, you're not going to be able to fix somebody, uh, but they can be carried. And that's what you do. You carry your
Yeah.
grief. You're never going to fix it, but you carry it, and over time it gets lighter.
Yes, exactly like I talked about earlier on today, part of that job of being that creating that safe space, and I'm sure Connie, you've seen it with your clients too, right? In the beginning, it's so heavy and they will talk about it over and over and over and you will listen to the same thing over and over and over, but what you will find if is that the more they talk about it, it starts to become not as heavy. The burden is a little bit, and I'm gonna stop the share now, if I could find.
Yeah, I see that in the support groups too, and we see it in the
Yeah.
chat. Yeah. Yeah, that first time in, they're hurting.
Yes. Yeah. Connie, I saw people putting things, I didn't look at them in the chat, but is there anything?
Just somebody says we have all of our pets displayed in urns. Yeah, all my ashes and pictures around the house. Yeah, Yeah, I do too. I do too. It's how we honor them. And we do whatever is right for us. So I've seen a lot about somatic therapy. Sometimes you need to move your body to yeah. Yeah, that's why a lot of times if you get like a deep tissue massage, you'll start to cry. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
so yeah, a lot of that.
Again, I'm going to share this and look, I do believe in somatic therapy. I do believe in tapping kind of thing. I just ask you to be cautious though, because we have had um people take our course who are acupuncturists or Reiki people. And my concern, we've had these conversations is that you think everything can be healed by acupuncture or by Reiki. No, it can't. Isn't that why you're taking the course? Because you want other tools, along with Reiki or along with, um, eh, acupuncture. So I think it's important, and that's where we talked about the different therapies to stay open and allow that integration to occur. Is there anything else?
Uh, says, does that anyone work in a clinic and have a little library of these books that we have talked about and maybe some of the kids' books as well? Um, yeah, I can send uh my list that I send to clients. It's got several books on that.
And definitely, I think it is good to have, and Connie, I think you'll agree with this. I never refer a book unless I've read it.
Yeah. You will
It's,
want to read the books before.
yeah,
Because there was one book I remember that's one of our teams said, this is a great book. And I finally read it and I went, well, maybe not for everyone."
I often think of God bless her, Ellie,
Yeah,
and is that what you're talking about?
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking, well,
We had, and I always call her our mentor, our second mother, or an amazing woman who is really at the start of pet loss, but she was a very, very religious woman. And so she found this book called Bill at the Rainbow Bridge. And that's what she's talking about. She's like, oh, that's something that I want everybody, when we did the chat rooms with another organization. They want, she wanted everybody to hear at this Bill. And she even, I think, didn't she know the author or she reached out to him or
I'm
something?
not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not sure.
And he sent her like like a signed copy of it. I remember her, she was so enamored with that book. And it is a beautiful story if and listen, I do believe in the afterlife, but there's a lot of people who don't, and so it's not going to work. So be really careful. I always tell my clients to, if you were to Google right now, pet loss books, I honestly think there's like 100 of them out there,
At
right?
least. At least.
Um, Here's the problem. Like we said, pet loss is definitely more known, or talked about it. Unfortunately, there's people who just kind of want to make a buck. I hate to say it. So they lose a dog or they lose a cat and they write a book, how to heal from pet loss, my experience with Fluffy. And they will put in there, and there's one book, and I changed the name a little bit, but it was horrible. I mean, it was saying, like things um in the area about afterlife. Afterlife is just an excuse and you need to just deal with it. And
Oh
I was
God.
like, ooh, like ouch. And one of my clients actually read it. So again, there too, that's part of the reason. I always tell my clients when it comes to pet loss books, look to see who the author is. Do they have any experience in, or are they just telling a story? And look, there's nothing wrong if you want to read a sweet story about a dog who died. I mean, I tend to stay away from those, but I never saw Marley and Mino, and I never.
Oh, I have some of those in my bibliography, but I think there's room
Yeah,
for them.
I think you just have to, that's what I'm saying though. I think you have to be careful about the context, and look to see who wrote them. Is it a sweet story? Is that what you need? Is that what's going to help you? Again, I tend to think that like books like When Your Pet Dies or things like that can give you more of a foundation maybe to begin to heal. Again, it's what I happen to like. I think it's useful for anybody. What is it? The golden, now I won't remember the name of it. The golden leash or the invisible leash.
Invisible Leash.
It's a children's book. It's a beautiful story though about pet loss, and how basically, the bond, the leash, we're talking about continuing bonds is never broken. So it applies for humans and children. Is there anything else? Anything?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. I don't see anything. Okay, so like I said, the good news is you don't have to do an interview this week. Um, I would really recommend that take the time to to go slow in writing up your answers on the scenarios. Um, Same thing applies. One word answers don't cut it. Read the question fully. Make sure that you're answering the question that we're looking for, right? When we're talking about specific techniques, make sure you're putting down the technique and then you put the examples. Listen to the webinar and to get an example of an idea of what those examples may be. Remember, active listening, not a technique, you know. So I'm trying as hard as I can not to get that as an answer.
And don't overthink it.
Yeah,
Don't overthink it.
yeah. And pay attention. We do have a question in there, and it's something that has helped me a lot. Do the mirror work. Really try it. It's gonna feel weird a little bit the first time you do it, but it can really make a difference. So, okay. All right. So I will have this recording to you by tomorrow afternoon. Um, the assignments are due Friday. Remember on Saturday, Sunday, we have module 7, which is another webinar. Okay. All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Connie, if you could stay just for a sec.
No problem.
And let me look to see. Oh, there it is.